She thought no one would ever hear her story. But now you did. Subscribe to give a voice to others like her. Asterisk, asterisk. My name is Sarah. I'm 22 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that selling flowers on a street corner would lead to the most extraordinary twist of fate imaginable. Everyone thought I was just another young woman trying to make ends meet, but the truth was so much deeper, so much more desperate than anyone could have guessed. I need to share this story before it's too late, before the weight of keeping this secret crushes what's left of my spirit. What happened that rainy Thursday evening changed everything I thought I knew about kindness, about strangers, and about the mysterious ways life can surprise us when we least expect it. It all started 6 months ago when my mother collapsed at work. The doctor said it was her heart, that she needed immediate surgery followed by extensive treatment. The bills began piling up like autumn leaves, each one more suffocating than the last. Our insurance covered barely half of what we needed, and I watched helplessly as our savings evaporated faster than morning dew. I had dropped out of college the year before to help support our family after Dad left us. Mom never complained, never made me feel guilty, but I could see the worry lines deepening around her eyes every single day. She would lie awake at night, and I could hear her quiet sobs through the thin walls of our tiny apartment. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I started selling flowers on the corner of 5th and Main Street, right outside the hospital where Mom was being treated. It seemed poetic in a tragic way, selling symbols of life and beauty while fighting to save the most important life in mine. The first few weeks were brutal. People would walk past me like I was invisible, clutching their phones and rushing to whatever important destination awaited them. My hands would freeze in the winter air, and my heart would break a little. More each time someone ignored my hopeful smile, but I couldn't give up. Every dollar I earned meant another day of treatment for Mom, another chance for her to fight this terrible disease that was slowly stealing her away from me. I would arrive at my corner at 6 in the morning and stay until the last commuter hurried past on their way home. Some days I made $50, other days barely 20. It wasn't nearly enough to cover the mounting medical expenses, but it was something. It was hope packaged in beautiful petals and tied with colorful ribbons. I still remember the exact moment everything began to change. It was a Thursday evening, and the rain was coming down in sheets. Most people had already sought shelter, and I was getting ready to pack up my remaining flowers when I saw him approaching through the downpour. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, wearing an expensive-looking coat that was now soaked through. What struck me most wasn't his appearance, though it was the way he walked. There was something purposeful about his stride, as if he was searching for something very specific, but what happened next left me completely speechless, and I still get chills thinking about it. The stranger stopped directly in front of my flower stand, and for a moment we just stared at each other through the rain. His eyes were kind, but carried a weight that I recognized, the same exhausted sadness I saw in my own reflection every morning. Water dripped from his gray hair, but he didn't seem to care about getting soaked. How much for all of them? He asked quietly, gesturing toward my remaining flowers. There were probably 30 bouquets left, mostly roses and lilas that I'd been hoping to sell before they wilted. I was so shocked that I almost couldn't speak. All of them? I stammered, wiping rain from my eyes. That would be about $400, sir. He reached into his coat pocket without hesitation and pulled out a thick wallet. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. $400 would cover Mom's medication for 2 weeks, maybe even help with part of her next treatment, but then something unexpected happened. As he counted out the bills, he looked up at me with those penetrating eyes and asked, "What's your story, young lady?" Why are you out here in this weather selling flowers? I don't know what came over me, but suddenly I was telling him everything. About mom's condition, about dropping out of school, about the endless cycle of hope and despair that had become my daily existence. The words poured out of me like the rain falling around us, and he listened to every single word without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that still brings tears to my eyes. He handed me not $400, but $800, and said, "The extra is for your mother's treatment." I tried to protest, to tell him it was too much, but he held up his hand. "My name is Robert," he said gently, "and I have a feeling our paths crossing tonight wasn't an accident." He took all the flowers, but instead of walking away, he asked me something that would haunt me for weeks. "Would you be willing to meet me here tomorrow at the same time? I have a proposition that might interest you." I was so overwhelmed by his generosity that I could barely think straight. Of course I agreed, though I had no idea what kind of proposition he could possibly have for a college dropout who sold flowers on street corners. That night, I rushed to the hospital to see Mom. For the first time in months, I had enough money to pay for her medications without having to choose between that and our rent. The relief on her face when I told her about the mysterious stranger almost made all the struggle worth it. "There are still good people in this world, sweetheart," she whispered, squeezing my hand with what little strength she had left. "Sometimes angels appear when we need them most." I couldn't sleep that night, wondering what Robert wanted to discuss. Part of me was terrified that his generosity came with strings attached, but something in his eyes had seemed genuine. There was a kindness there, but also a deep sadness that mirrored my own. The next evening, I arrived at our meeting spot 30 minutes early. I had spent the entire day anxious, playing out different scenarios in my mind. What if he wanted something inappropriate in return for his help? What if this was all some elaborate scheme? But when Robert appeared at exactly the time we'd agreed upon, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing that same kind expression, my fears began to melt away. "I hope you don't mind," he said, offering me one of the cups. I thought we might both need something warm to drink. What he told me next would change the trajectory of my entire life, but I had no way of knowing that in that moment. Robert sat down on the bench next to my usual flower spot and took a long sip of his coffee. The evening was calmer than the night before, with just a light drizzle that created halos around the streetlights. I clutched my cup with both hands, partly for warmth and partly to stop them from shaking with nervousness. "Sarah," he began, and hearing my name from his lips felt strangely comforting. "I want to tell you why I was walking in the rain last night, and why meeting you felt like more than just coincidence." He paused, staring into the distance as if gathering courage for what he was about to reveal. "My daughter would have been your age this year. She died in a car accident 3 years ago, right here at this intersection." My heart stopped. I looked around at the familiar corner where I'd spent countless hours, suddenly seeing it through completely different eyes. This wasn't just a random street corner. It was a place of profound grief and loss. "Her name was Emma," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was studying to become a nurse, wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. She had your same determination, your same fierce love for family." I didn't know what to say. How do you respond to someone sharing such devastating loss? I set down my coffee and found myself reaching out to touch his arm, a gesture of comfort that felt completely natural despite having just met him. Every year on the anniversary of the accident, I come here. I walk this corner for hours, trying to feel close to her somehow. Last night was that anniversary, and I was about to give up and go home when I saw you. The weight of this revelation was overwhelming. Of all the corners in the city, I had chosen the exact spot where his daughter had died to try to save my own mother's life. The irony was almost too much to bear. When I saw you there, soaked to the bone but refusing to give up, caring for those flowers like they were precious treasures, it was like seeing Emma again. She would have done exactly the same thing if her mother had been sick. Robert reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. Even in the dim streetlight, I could see that Emma had been beautiful, bright eyes, warm smile, the kind of person who probably lit up every room she entered. "I've been thinking all day about what I want to propose to you," he said carefully, putting the photo away. "My wife and I, we've been lost since Emma died. We have more money than we could ever spend, but we've forgotten how to find meaning in our lives." He turned to face me directly, and I could see tears glistening in his eyes. "I want to help you save your mother, Sarah, not just with money, but with the best medical care available. I want to honor Emma's memory by helping someone who reminds me so much of her." I was speechless. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me, people who struggled paycheck to paycheck and sold flowers in the rain. "I don't understand," I managed to whisper. "You don't even know us. How can you offer something so incredible to complete strangers?" Robert smiled for the first time since I'd met him, and suddenly I could see glimpses of the man he must have been before tragedy struck his family. Because grief has taught me that love is the only thing that matters in this world. And sometimes the universe gives us opportunities to transform our pain into something beautiful. But what he revealed next about his true identity would shock me even more than his generous offer. Robert stood up from the bench and began pacing slowly, as if the words he needed to say were too heavy to deliver while sitting still. The streetlight cast long shadows across his face, making him look both mysterious and oddly familiar. "Sarah, there's something else I need to tell you about who I am," he said, his voice carrying a gravity that made my stomach clench with anticipation. "My full name is Robert Harrison, and I own Harrison Medical Group." The name hit me like a physical blow. Harrison Medical Group was one of the largest private medical companies in the state, known for their cutting-edge treatments and research facilities. I had seen their name on buildings throughout the city, but never imagined I would meet the man behind the empire. "The hospital where your mother is being treated, we own it," he continued, watching my reaction carefully. "When I decided to help you, I pulled her medical records. Her case is complicated, but it's not hopeless. Not if she gets the right treatment." I felt like I was drowning in information I couldn't quite process. This stranger, this grieving father, who had found me selling flowers in the rain, wasn't just wealthy. He was the person who literally controlled whether my mother lived or died. "I've already spoken with Dr. Martinez, your mother's cardiologist," Robert said gently. "He's good, but he's been limited by what your insurance will cover. I want to remove those limitations entirely." My legs felt weak, and I had to sit back, down on the bench. "Why are you telling me this? Why not just help anonymously?" Robert stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Because I don't want you to think this is charity. I want you to understand that you're giving me something in return. You're giving me a way to channel my grief into something meaningful." He sat back down beside me, and for a moment we both stared at the intersection where his daughter had died, where my desperate hope had led me to set up my flower stand. "There's more," he said quietly. "I've been watching you for 3 weeks." My blood turned to ice. "Watching me?" "Not in a creepy way," he said quickly, seeing my alarm. "I drive by this corner every day on my way to work. I've seen you here in snow, rain, blazing sun. I've watched you carefully arrange those flowers like they were made of gold. I've seen you give free bouquets to other people who looked like they were having bad days." I remembered those moments. The elderly woman who had been crying, the young father who looked overwhelmed. I had given away flowers we desperately needed to sell, but something inside me couldn't watch people suffer when I had something beautiful to offer. That's when I knew, Robert continued. That's when I realized Emma had led me to you. She always said that kindness was the most important thing a person could possess, more valuable than money or success or anything else. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, but not the kind I expected. It was handmade with Emma's photo on it and writing I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. Emma made this for me when she was 16, he explained. It says, "Dad, your superpower is making people feel less alone." She gave it to me after I helped pay for a coworker's surgery. The parallel between that moment and this one wasn't lost on either of us. I want to offer you a job, Sarah, not out of pity, but because I think you understand something that most people have forgotten, that every person matters, that every life is worth fighting for. My heart was racing again, but this time it wasn't from fear or nervousness. It was from something I hadn't felt in months, hope. But what happened when I got home that night would test everything I thought I knew about trust and second chances, ... I practically floated home that night. Robert's business card clutched in my hand like a winning lottery ticket. We had agreed to meet the next morning at his office to discuss the details of both my mother's treatment and the job he had mentioned. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Mom was healthy and we weren't drowning. And ... our apartment felt different when I walked through the door, lighter somehow, as if the weight of our struggles had already begun to lift. Mom was asleep in her chair, the television still flickering with some late-night talk show. She looked so peaceful that I almost didn't want to wake her with the incredible news, but when I gently touched her shoulder, her eyes opened immediately. She had developed that light sleep that comes with constant worry, always alert for the next crisis or emergency call from the hospital. "How did it go with your mysterious benefactor?" she asked, trying to sit up straighter despite her obvious exhaustion. I told her everything about Robert, about Emma, about the job offer and the promise of better medical care. With each word, I watched her expression shift from cautious hope to disbelief to overwhelming gratitude. "Sweetheart," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Are you sure this is real? Things like this don't happen to people like us." Her doubt pierced my heart because I recognized it as my own. We had been disappointed so many times, had so many doors slammed in our faces, that accepting genuine kindness felt almost impossible. "I know it sounds crazy," I admitted, "but Mom, what if it's real? What if this is our chance?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning Robert's business card over in my hands, studying every detail as if it might disappear if I stopped looking at it. The rational part of my brain kept insisting that this was too good to be true, that there had to be a catch. But there was something else, something deeper than logic that told me Robert's grief was real, his desire to help was genuine, and that somehow Emma's spirit had indeed guided him to that rainy corner where I sold flowers. The next morning, I put on the only professional outfit I owned, a black skirt and white blouse I had bought for job interviews the year before. My hands shook as I applied makeup, trying to look like someone worthy of working for a medical empire. Harrison Medical Group's headquarters was a gleaming glass tower downtown, the kind of building I had walked past 1,000 times without ever imagining I might one day work inside. The lobby was all marble and chrome, filled with important-looking people in expensive suits. I gave Robert's name to the receptionist, half expecting her to look at me like I was lying. Instead, she smiled warmly and said, "Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Please take the private elevator to the top floor." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to another world. Through the glass walls, I could see the entire city spread out below, including the tiny corner where I had sold flowers just hours before. Robert's office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough space for a small apartment. But what struck me most was how personal it was. Family photos everywhere, Emma's artwork from childhood covering one entire wall, fresh flowers in every corner. "I hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to all the flowers. "I bought them from various vendors around the city this morning. It seemed appropriate." He led me to a comfortable seating area away from his imposing desk, and I realized he was trying to make this feel less formal, less intimidating. "Before we talk about anything else," Robert said, "I want you to know that I've already spoken with your mother's medical team. They're scheduling her for surgery next week with our best cardiac surgeon." I felt my knees give out and I sank into the leather chair. "Next week, but but how much will it cost?" "We still don't have insurance approval for Sarah." His voice was gentle but firm. "There will be no cost to you or your mother. This is not negotiable." But what he revealed about the job offer would challenge everything. I thought I was capable of asterisk. Robert walked over to his desk and returned with a thick folder that he placed on the coffee table between us. The weight of it seemed to represent something much larger than just paperwork. "The position I want to offer you," he began, "isn't what you might expect. I don't need another administrative assistant or customer service representative. I need someone who understands what it means to fight for people who can't fight for themselves." He opened the folder, revealing documents, photographs, and what looked like medical charts. "We're launching a new program called Emma's Angels, a patient advocacy initiative designed to help families navigate our healthcare system when they're overwhelmed or don't know where to turn." My breath caught in my throat as I realized what he was describing. This wasn't just a job. It was exactly what I had needed when Mom first got sick. When I felt lost and helpless in a maze of insurance forms and medical terminology. "You would work directly with families in crisis," Robert continued, his eyes lighting up with passion for the first time since I'd met him. "You'd help them understand their options, connect them with resources, advocate for them when they feel voiceless. Essentially, you'd be doing for others what I'm doing for you right now." I stared at the materials spread across the table, trying to process the magnitude of what he was offering. "But I don't have any medical training. I dropped out of college. I've been selling flowers on street corners." "And that's exactly why you're perfect for this job," Robert said firmly. "You've lived the experience our patients are going through. You understand their fear, their desperation, their feeling of being lost in a system that doesn't seem to care about them as people." He pulled out a photograph from the folder, a young mother holding a baby, both looking exhausted and scared. "This is Maria Santos. Her premature son needed surgery that insurance was trying to deny. She speaks limited English and was about to give up when one of our social workers connected her with our pilot program." "What happened?" I asked already, emotionally invested in this stranger's story. "We fought for her. We navigated the bureaucracy, found additional funding, and connected her with specialists who could help. Her son just celebrated his first birthday." Robert showed me more photos, more stories. An elderly man whose cancer treatment had been delayed, a teenager whose mental health crisis had been ignored, a veteran whose PTSD was going untreated. In each case, having someone who truly cared and knew how to navigate the system had made the difference between life and death. "The salary would be $60,000 a year to start," he said quietly, "with full health benefits for you and your mother and opportunities for advancement as the program grows." $60,000. More money than I had ever imagined making, especially without a college degree. But more than that, it was meaningful work, the chance to prevent other families from going through what Mom and I had endured. There's one more thing, Robert said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. This program will put you in direct contact with our most difficult cases. You'll see suffering every day. You'll lose some battles despite your best efforts. It's emotionally demanding work that not everyone can handle. I thought about the past 6 months, about watching my mother fade away while feeling powerless. To help her, about the countless nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering if we would lose everything. I've already been living with that kind of emotional weight, I said quietly. The difference is now I might actually be able to help people instead of just watching them suffer. Robert smiled, and I could see Emma in his expression, the same compassion, the same determination to make the world a little bit better. "Can you start?" he asked, but before I could answer, his assistant knocked on the door with news that would shake both of us to our core. Asterisk. Robert's assistant, a professional-looking woman in her 40s, entered with an expression that immediately set my nerves on edge. She was holding what appeared to be a medical file, and her usual composed demeanor seemed shaken. "Mr. Harrison," she said carefully, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Martinez just called from the hospital. It's about Sarah's mother." The folder in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. All the hope, all the plans we had just been discussing seemed to hang in the balance of whatever news she was about to deliver. "What is it, Patricia?" Robert asked, standing up quickly. "Her condition has deteriorated rapidly since this morning. They're moving her to intensive care, and Dr. Martinez says they may need to perform emergency surgery tonight instead of waiting until next week." The room started spinning around me. Just hours ago, I had been floating on clouds of hope and possibility. Now, the familiar terror of potentially losing my mother came crashing back with devastating force. "I need to get to the hospital," I said, trying to stand but finding my legs unsteady. "I need to be with her." Robert was already moving toward his desk, grabbing his coat and keys. "Patricia, call Dr. Martinez and tell him we're on our way. Also, get Dr. Richardson on the line. If they're operating tonight, I want our best cardiac surgeon involved." "Sir, Dr. Richardson is in surgery until this evening," Patricia replied. "Then have him page the moment he's available. This is a priority case." As we rushed toward the elevator, Robert placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Sarah, your mother is going to receive the best care possible. We're not going to lose her." The car ride to the hospital was a blur of city streets and mounting anxiety. Robert drove with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was as invested in saving my mother as I was. He made several phone calls during the drive, apparently mobilizing every resource at his disposal. Asterisk. "I've arranged for a private room in our cardiac intensive care unit," he told me as we pulled into the hospital parking garage, "and I've assembled a full team of specialists to evaluate her case." We practically ran through the hospital corridors, past the same corner where I had sold flowers just the day before. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, racing to save my mother's life in the very building owned by the man who had found me in the rain. When we reached the ICU, I could see Mom through the glass door of her room. She was connected to more machines than I had ever seen, her face pale and peaceful in a way that terrified me. She looked so small, so fragile. Nothing like the strong woman who had raised me alone. Asterisk. Dr. Martinez met us in the hallway, his expression grave but determined. "The good news is that we caught the deterioration early. Her heart is struggling, but she's stable for now. The surgery can't wait, though. We need to operate within the next few hours. What are her chances?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "With the surgery, she has a 70% chance of full recovery. Without it, He didn't need to finish the sentence. Asterisk 70%. Better odds than we'd had in months, but still a 30% chance of losing the most important person. In my world, Robert stepped forward. Doctor, I want Dr. Richardson to lead the surgical team. I know he's busy, but this is important to me personally. Mr. Harrison, Dr. Martinez began. Please, Robert said quietly, do this for me. There was something in his tone that made Dr. Martinez nod immediately. I'll make the arrangements. Asterisk, as the medical team began their preparations, I sat beside Mom's bed, holding her hand and trying to be strong for both of us. But what she whispered to me as they prepared to take her to surgery would haunt me for the rest of my life. Asterisk. Mom's eyes fluttered open as the nurses began preparing to wheel her bed toward the operating room. Despite all the medications they had given her, she seemed remarkably alert, as if she had been saving her strength for this moment. Sarah, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the medical equipment. Come closer. I leaned down so my ear was nearly touching her lips, and what she said next stopped my heart completely. I need to tell you something about your father, my father, the man who had walked out on us 3 years ago, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. Mom and I rarely spoke about him anymore. The subject was too painful, too raw. Mom, you need to save your strength for the surgery, I said gently, but she gripped my hand with surprising force. No, sweetie. If something happens to me, you need to know the truth. The surgical team was getting impatient, but something in Mom's expression told me this couldn't wait. I looked up at Robert, who was standing nearby, and he immediately understood. Give. Use 2 more minutes, he told the medical staff. His authority in this hospital was absolute, and they stepped back respectfully. Your father didn't leave because he stopped loving us, Mom continued, her words coming in short bursts between labored breaths. He left because he was trying to protect us. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about the reason we had struggled so much, was suddenly in question. He got involved with some dangerous people, borrowed money we couldn't repay. When they started threatening us, threatening you, he made a choice. He disappeared to keep us safe. Tears were streaming down both our faces now. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I wanted you to be angry at him instead of worried about him. I thought it would be easier for you to move on if you believed he had abandoned us. The surgical team was beginning to move again, but Mom wasn't finished. He sends money when he can, she whispered urgently. Not much, but it's how we've been. Able to keep the apartment? The payments come from different names, different places, but I know it's him. My mind was reeling. All this time, I had been selling flowers to pay for Mom's treatment, believing we were completely alone in the world. But Dad had been trying to help from whatever dangerous exile he had chosen to protect us. Where is he now? I asked desperately. I don't know, Mom admitted. But Sarah, if I don't make it through this surgery... Don't talk like that, I interrupted, but she continued. If I don't make it, promise me you'll try to find him. Promise me you'll tell him what happened. He deserves to know, and you deserve to have your father back in your life. The nurses were now insisting that they had to move her immediately. As they began wheeling the bed toward the operating room, Mom called out one more thing that would change everything, Robert. She said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Thank you for giving my daughter hope again. You remind me of someone I used to know, someone who also believed in helping people when they had nowhere else to turn. Robert stepped forward, taking Mom's other hand. You're going to be fine, Mrs. Chen. I promise you that. Take care of her, Mom said, looking directly into his eyes. She's stronger than she knows, but she's been carrying this burden alone for too long. As they disappeared behind the operating room doors, I collapsed into a chair, Overwhelmed by the double shock of Mom's revelation about Dad and the terrifying reality that I might lose her forever, Robert sat beside me in the waiting area, and we maintained a vigil that would last through the longest night of my life. But what he discovered during those dark hours would reveal a connection none of us could have ever imagined. Hours passed in the surgical waiting room like years. Robert had arranged for coffee and food to be brought to us, but I couldn't touch anything. Every time the operating room doors opened, my heart would leap. Hoping for news about Mom's condition. Around midnight, Robert's phone rang. He answered it quietly, walking to the far end of the waiting area so I couldn't hear the conversation. When he returned, his expression was troubled in a way that had nothing to do with Mom's surgery. "Sarah," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever the answer is, it won't change anything about helping your mother or offering you the job." I looked up at him, confused by the sudden shift in his tone. "What is it? Your mother's last name is Chun, but what was your father's name? His full name?" The question seemed to come out of nowhere, but something in Robert's expression told me this was important. "David Chen. Well, David Christopher Chen. He took Mom's name when they got married because his family had disowned him." Robert went very still. "What was his original last name?" "Morrison," I said, wondering why this mattered. "David Christopher Morrison. Why are you asking?" The color drained from Robert's face so completely that I thought he might faint. He sat down heavily, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. "Robert, what's wrong?" I asked, genuinely alarmed. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph I had never seen before, a much younger version of my father, maybe in his early 20s, standing next to a man I now recognized as a younger Robert Harrison. "This was taken 15 years ago," Robert said quietly. "Your father and I were business partners. We started Harrison Medical Group together." The waiting room seemed to tilt on its axis. Nothing made sense anymore. "That's impossible," I whispered. Dad never mentioned knowing anyone named Harrison. He worked construction jobs, odd jobs. He was as single quotes T. He wasn't a businessman. "David was the most brilliant financial mind I've ever known," Robert continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "He helped me build this company from nothing. We were best friends, closer than brothers." I stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile. The successful-looking young man in the picture with the stressed, defeated father I remembered from my childhood. "What happened between you?" I asked. Robert was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with painful memories. "We had a disagreement about the direction of the company. I wanted to expand aggressively, take on investors, go public. David wanted to keep it smaller, more focused on patient care than profits." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "I was young and arrogant. I thought I knew better. When David refused to sign off on the expansion, I forced him out. I used legal technicalities to buy out his share of the company for far less than it was worth." The betrayal in his voice was unmistakable. "I destroyed our friendship over money and ego. David tried to start his own medical practice, but I had connections throughout the industry. I made sure he couldn't get the financing or partnerships he needed." My father's downward spiral suddenly made sense. The construction jobs, the mounting debts, the dangerous people Mom had mentioned, all of it stemmed from Robert destroying his legitimate career out of greed and pride. "He tried to reach out to me several times over the years," Robert continued, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. "But I was too proud, too stubborn to admit I had been wrong. I told myself he had betrayed me, when the truth was exactly the opposite. I felt a rage building inside me that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. This man, this supposedly kind benefactor who had appeared like an angel in my life, was directly responsible for my family's suffering. You destroyed him, I said, standing up from my chair. You destroyed my father, and then you have the audacity to play savior to his family. But what Robert revealed next about the night Emma died would shatter everything I thought I understood. About guilt, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways our lives intersect. Robert looked up at me with such profound anguish that my anger faltered for just a moment. Sarah, please sit down. There's more you need to know, and it's going to be harder to hear than what I've already told you. Against my better judgment, I sat back down, but kept my distance from him. Everything I thought I knew about this man, about the miraculous turn in our fortunes, had been revealed as something much more complicated and painful. The night Emma died, Robert began, his voice barely audible. She wasn't alone in the car. My blood turned to ice. I had a terrible feeling I knew where this was going, but I couldn't bring myself to interrupt. She was with a man named David Morrison. They had been seeing each other secretly for several months. The world stopped spinning. My father had been with Emma the night she died. David survived the crash, Robert continued, each word seeming to cause him physical pain. He was in the hospital for weeks, but he recovered. Emma didn't. I couldn't breathe. All this time, I had thought my father left us because of gambling debts or dangerous people. But the truth was so much worse. He had left because he couldn't face the man whose daughter had died while in his care. The accident wasn't anyone's fault, Robert said quickly, seeing my expression. A drunk driver ran a red light. There was nothing David could have done to prevent it. But he blamed himself completely. Did you blame him too? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Robert's silence was answer enough. I was destroyed by grief, he finally admitted. I needed someone to blame, and David was there. Even though I knew intellectually that it wasn't his fault, emotionally I couldn't separate him from Emma's death. He pulled out another photograph, this one showing Emma and my father together, both smiling and happy. She looked so much like the young woman in Robert's earlier photos, but there was something different, a lightness in her expression that spoke of being deeply in love. They were planning to tell us about their relationship, Robert said softly. Emma had been trying to work up the courage to introduce David to us properly. She knew about our history, about the business falling apart, but she didn't care. She said love was more important than old grudges. The irony was crushing. Emma, the daughter whose memory Robert was trying to honor by helping me, had been in love with my father. And instead of bringing our families together, her death had driven us even further apart. After the funeral, David came to see me, Robert continued. He was broken, devastated. He tried to apologize, tried to explain how much he had loved Emma. But I was so consumed by grief and anger that I told him. I never wanted to see him again. I said that if he truly loved Emma, he would disappear and never remind me of what I had lost. So he did, I whispered, understanding finally dawning. He disappeared to protect you from the pain of seeing him and to protect us from your anger. Yes, and I spent 3 years convincing myself that I had been justified, that he was the villain in the story. It wasn't until I saw you selling flowers on that corner, Emma's corner, that I began to realize what I had done. A new wave of anger washed over me, but this time it was mixed with something else. A terrible understanding of how grief and guilt can twist people into making unforgivable choices. You didn't help me out of kindness, I said. You helped me out of guilt. I helped you, Robert said firmly, because you reminded me of everything good about Emma and everything good about David. Yes, I feel guilty about what I did to your family, but Sarah, my guilt doesn't make your mother's recovery any less real or this job opportunity any less genuine. Just then, the operating room doors opened and Dr. Richardson emerged, still wearing his surgical scrubs. The expression on his face would determine everything about our future. Dr. Richardson pulled off his surgical cap and walked toward us with the measured pace of someone who had delivered both miracles and tragedies countless times. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out everything else in the waiting room. The surgery was successful, he said, and I nearly collapsed with relief. We were able to repair the damaged arteries and restore normal blood flow to her heart. Your mother is going to make a full recovery. I burst into tears, all the terror and exhaustion of the past months finally finding release. Robert placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, and for a moment I forgot about everything he had revealed, focusing only on the miraculous news that Mom was going to be okay. She needs several weeks of recovery and cardiac rehabilitation, Dr. Richardson continued, but with proper follow-up care, she should be able to return to a completely normal life. When can I see her? I asked, wiping tears from my cheeks. She's being moved to recovery now. You can see her in about an hour, once she's fully awake from the anesthesia. As Dr. Richardson left to check on other patients, I found myself alone, with Robert again, facing the complicated reality of everything we had discussed. My mother was going to live, but the circumstances that had led to her salvation were more complex than I could have ever imagined. I don't know how to feel about any of this, I admitted, sitting back down in the uncomfortable waiting room chair. I'm grateful beyond words that Mom is going to be okay, but I'm also angry about what you did to my father and confused about why you really helped us. Robert nodded, understanding the conflict I was experiencing. You have every right to be angry. What I did to David was unforgivable, driven by pride and grief and a dozen other emotions that don't excuse my actions. He was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. But Sarah, I want you to know that regardless of how this all started, my offer to help your mother and give you a job comes from a genuine place now. You've shown me something I thought I had lost forever, hope. Hope for what? I asked. Hope that I might be able to make amends for the damage I've caused. Hope that Emma's death might lead to something meaningful instead of just endless grief. Hope that your father might someday forgive me for the terrible choices I made. The mention of my father brought back all the questions that had been building since Mom's revelation before surgery. Do you know where he is now? No, Robert admitted. But I have resources, investigators, people who could help us find him if you want to try. The thought of seeing my father again, of finally understanding the full truth about why he had left, was both terrifying and exhilarating. There were so many questions I needed to ask him, so much pain and confusion that only he could help resolve. I need time to think about all of this, I said. About the job, about finding Dad, about what it means that you and he were once friends. Of course, Robert agreed. Take all the time you need. Your mother's medical care is guaranteed regardless of any other decisions you make. A nurse appeared in the doorway and called my name. Miss Chan, your mother is awake and asking for you. As I stood to follow the nurse, Robert called out softly, Sarah, for whatever it's worth, I think your father would be incredibly proud of the woman you've become. Emma always said that love leaves its mark on the world, even after we're gone. I think she was right. Walking toward Mom's recovery room, my mind was spinning with everything that had happened in just 24 hours. Yesterday, I had been a desperate young woman selling flowers in the rain. Now, I was the daughter of a man who had helped build a medical empire, loved by a woman who had died tragically, and connected to a grieving father who was trying to find redemption through helping my family. But when I saw Mom's eyes open and Focused, when I heard her whisper my name with a strength I hadn't heard in months, I realized that some stories are too complex for simple categorization. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are also the ones who save us. Sometimes redemption comes through the most unexpected connections. What I decided to do next would change not just my life, but potentially reunite a broken friendship and bring healing to wounds that had festered for years. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my new office at Harrison Medical Group, surrounded by case files of families who needed someone to fight for them, just as Robert had fought for us. The Emma's Angels program had officially launched, and already we were making a difference in lives that had seemed hopeless just days before. Mom was recovering beautifully at home. Her color returned and her energy levels improving every day. The expensive medications that had once been impossible luxuries were now covered completely, and she had access to the best cardiac specialists in the state for ongoing care. But the most important decision I had made was to accept Robert's offer. To help find my father, the investigator he hired was a quiet, but efficient woman named Detective Morrison, no relation to Dad. Just one of those strange coincidences that seemed to define our story. It took her only 10 days to locate David Christopher Morrison, living under an assumed name in a small town 3 states away, working as a handyman and sending what money he could to an account he believed was helping us anonymously. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing a case about a teenage boy whose insulin treatments were being denied by insurance. My phone rang, and Detective Morrison's voice was gentle but excited. "I found him, Sarah. Your father is alive." And well, and when I mentioned your name, he broke down completely. He wants to see you more than anything in the world, but he's terrified that you hate him for leaving. That afternoon, Robert offered to drive me to the small town where Dad was living. The 3-hour car ride was filled with nervous conversation about what I would say, how I would explain everything that had happened, whether it was possible to rebuild a relationship that had been broken by such extraordinary circumstances. "He doesn't know about your mother's surgery," Robert reminded me as we pulled into the tiny downtown area where Dad was living. "He doesn't know that she's okay, or that you know the truth about Emma. We found him working in the garden behind." A small apartment building, his hair now completely gray, but his hands still strong and capable. When he looked up and saw me walking toward him, the gardening tools dropped from his hands, and he started crying before I could say a single word. "Sarah," he whispered, reaching out as if he wasn't sure I was real. "My beautiful girl, I've missed you so much." I ran into his arms, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt truly complete. All the anger, all the questions, all the pain of his absence melted away in that moment of reunion. "Dad," I sobbed into his shoulder. "Mom told me everything. About the dangerous people, about Emma, about why you really left. You don't have to hide anymore." It took him several minutes to compose himself enough to notice Robert standing respectfully nearby. When he did, his expression shifted from joy to confusion to something approaching fear. "Robert," he said quietly, how did you?" "Hello, David," Robert replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "I owe you the biggest apology of my life." What happened next was 3 hours of painful, honest conversation. Robert explained how finding me had opened his eyes to the damage his pride and grief had caused. Dad shared the agony of loving Emma and losing her, of being blamed for something beyond his control, of choosing exile to protect the people he cared about most. But the most beautiful moment came when Robert pulled out a letter that Emma had written but never sent. A letter addressed to her parents, explaining her love for David and her hope that their relationship might heal the old wounds between the 2 men who had once been like brothers. "She believed love could fix everything," Robert said, handing the letter to Dad. "I think she was right." As the sun set over that small town, 3 broken people began the process of healing wounds that had seemed impossible to mend. Dad agreed to come home, to be part of Mom's recovery and my new life. Robert committed to not just making financial amends for the damage he had caused, but to rebuilding the friendship that had once meant everything to both men. The Emma's Angels program grew beyond anyone's expectations, helping hundreds of families navigate medical crises with dignity and hope. And sometimes, late at night, when I was working on a particularly difficult case, I would feel Emma's presence in the office, reminding me that even the most tragic circumstances can become the foundation for something beautiful. Love, I learned, doesn't just heal, it transforms. It takes our deepest pain and somehow creates opportunities for grace, for forgiveness, for connections that transcend our worst mistakes. That rainy night when I was selling flowers on a street corner, I thought I was just trying to save my mother's life. I had no idea I was actually participating in a miracle that would restore a family, heal a friendship, and prove that sometimes the universe conspires to bring the right people together at exactly the moment when hope seems impossible. Subscribe to the channel for more stories, because sometimes the most extraordinary miracles begin with the smallest acts of faith. But just when I thought our story had reached its perfect ending, life decided to throw us one more curveball that would test everything we thought we understood. About forgiveness and second chances. It happened 6 months after Dad came home. On a crisp autumn morning when the leaves were turning the same golden color as the flowers I used to sell. I was at work, helping a young father navigate his daughter's leukemia treatment, when my phone rang with a call that would change everything once again. "Sarah, it's Robert. You need to come to the hospital immediately. There's been an accident." My blood turned to ice, just like it had that night when Mom went into emergency surgery. "What kind of accident? Is it Mom? Is it Dad?" "It's neither," Robert said, his voice strained in a way I hadn't heard since the night we waited for Mom's surgery results. "Sarah, there's someone here who's been asking for you specifically. Someone who claims to know about Emma and your father." I left work immediately, my mind racing through possibilities as I drove to the hospital. Who could possibly know about the connection between Emma and Dad besides the 3 of us? We had kept that information private, sharing it only with Mom during one of our evening talks about healing and forgiveness. When I arrived at the emergency room, I found Robert pacing in the same waiting area where we had spent that terrifying night months earlier. His face was pale, and he looked like he had aged years in just the few hours since I had last seen him. "Robert, what's going on?" I demanded. "Who's here? What accident?" He stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression that mixed confusion, hope, and something that looked almost like fear. "There was a car accident about 2 hours ago. A woman in her 50s, driving alone, hit a patch of ice and slid into a tree. She's going to be fine, but when the paramedics found her, she was carrying this." He handed me a worn envelope with my name written on it in unfamiliar handwriting. The paper looked like it had been handled many times, folded and unfolded, carried around for months or maybe even years. She told the paramedics that she had been looking for Sarah Chun for almost 3 years, that she had information about David Morrison and Emma Harrison that could change everything. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated 2 weeks before Emma's death, written in the same neat handwriting that appeared on the envelope. "My dearest Emma," the letter began, "I know this letter will come as a shock, but I can't keep this secret any longer. David Morrison is not just the man you love, he's also your biological father." The waiting room seemed to tilt on its axis. I read the sentence 3 more times, but the words didn't change. According to this letter, my father was also Emma's father. "That's impossible," I whispered, looking up at Robert. That would mean ... That would mean Emma was your half-sister, Robert finished quietly, and that the woman in that hospital bed claims to be Emma's biological mother. I sank into a chair, trying to process information that seemed to contradict everything I thought. I knew about our families. If this letter was real, if Emma was Dad's daughter, then Robert wasn't just his former business partner. He was the man who had raised Dad's child without knowing it. Where is she? I asked. The woman who was carrying this letter? Room 314. She's conscious now, and she's been asking for you constantly. Her name is Margaret Sullivan, and Sarah ... She looks exactly like you. The walk to room 314 felt like the longest journey of my life. With each step, I tried to prepare myself for whatever revelation was waiting behind that door. If Margaret Sullivan was telling the truth, then Emma's death hadn't just taken away Robert's daughter and Dad's girlfriend. It had taken away my sister, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I entered that hospital room. Subscribe to the channel for more stories, because love really is the most powerful force in the universe, and it never stops creating miracles for those brave enough to believe in second chances.